Hello, this is H.G. Tudor, and this is part 4 of Ask H.G. Tudor. Our opening question comes from Laura, who is in Kuwait. She asks, can you take advantage or use a narcissist, manipulate him to get what you want? Or is it just a sense that we do, and in fact he allows it because of the fuel he is getting? It is certainly the case that if you are ensnared by a greater, he may give the appearance of allowing you to appear that you are manipulating him and getting your own way, but understand, he is only allowing this for the greater gain that he will achieve. This may well be done to cause you to gain a false sense of security, to make you more compliant, so that he can use these apparent gains that you have obtained against you to secure what he wants. The greater will not do anything unless it benefits him. With regard to the lesser and the mid-ranger, there is the possibility to manipulate those individuals to get what you want. However, what you have to be aware of is the fact that you are coming up against the narcissistic perspective. You will regard a situation through your lens, your worldview. We look at it differently, and therefore, in a situation whereby you may think that you have gauged the situation correctly, it may actually result in a criticism being perceived by us, which of course wounds us, and more likely than not will result in the ignition of fury. This might be hot fury, so this person lashes out, name-calling or with physical violence, or cold fury by way of silent treatment or cold shouldering you. Accordingly, if you are looking to manipulate a narcissist, you may well run foul of causing criticism, even though you do not think that you have, and there will be the ignition of fury with the consequences that follow. The main way to manipulate our kind is to use fuel, particularly positive fuel. If you lay on the charm, the appreciation, and the admiration, put us up on a pedestal, tell us how fantastic we are, with a view to causing that to allow you to do something, then you stand a good chance of getting your way, so long as it does not contravene with the needs of the narcissist in terms of control and the provision of fuel. For example, you might want to go to a particular place. You make the suggestion, and you can tell the immediate reaction from the narcissist is one whereby they do not appear to be happy with the suggestion that is being made. So, as a consequence, if, for example, you'd suggested going to a family barbecue and the reaction of the narcissist was not one which was with enthusiasm, it would be necessary for you to say, well, something along the lines of, all the family are really looking forward to seeing you, they think so highly of you, and such has a question to ask you about business, thus putting the spotlight firmly onto the narcissist, buttering them up, and that way you can manipulate them into agreeing to come along. Of course, over time, it will become apparent, particularly to a mid-ranger and obviously a greater, that you are deploying the same tactics. You can get away with it with a lesser for a longer period of time, but there is scope for manipulation, and the simplest way to achieve manipulation is to use the carrot of fuel. Do not use it in a sense of denying it to us. That will only result in us lashing out at you in order to extract the fuel from you, but you can use positive fuel in an enticing method to bring about achieving some of your own aims. But if they are diametrically opposed to that of the narcissist, all of the positive fuel you provide is not going to shift them, because this will alter the control dynamic too greatly, and that will not be acceptable to us. The next question is from Bindu, who asks, do you have methods for the healing process and how to? I am not a healer. It is contrary to what I am, because I don't care. What I will do, however, is provide you with the best foundation for you to achieve healing. This is because, in terms of dealing with our kind, there are essentially 3 key steps to the dynamic of recovery. The first is you must understand what you are dealing with. You have to understand, because that way you will make sense of what is happening. You will banish confusion, which is one of our main ways of controlling you. You will also reduce the manner by which you make decisions through emotion, which are always bad decisions, and instead you will make informed decisions using cool, hard logic. Accordingly, your first stage is to understand. To do that, you need to read. You need to read about narcissism, our kind, and naturally, my works are a superior source in that regard. Read, understand. You will then realize what you're dealing with, why those things have happened, why you were involved, why you have responded in the way that you have done. And with that understanding, you will clear away the fog of confusion. You will feel better. You will feel like a weight has been removed. This has been said to me many times by individuals who've contacted me. Once they understand, so much becomes clearer, and a weight has been lifted from their shoulders. Having obtained understanding, you then need to determine what action to take. It might be learning how to counter us. It might be learning how to escape us. It might be learning how to implement no contact. Again, through my works, there are a range of measures which help you counter our machinations and also impose no contact, and how to deal with hoovers and our attempts to draw you back into the narcissistic relationship. Understand, then counter, stroke escape. Once you have done that, some people, it is enough, and they are robust enough to move on, and they give a backward glance. For some people, the wounds are deeper. They may well be traumatized by the experience that they have suffered. They may have post-traumatic stress disorder and other complications. In that instance, you will need professional help in order to recover, seeing a doctor or a therapist, a specialist in a particular field that can help you with strategies to help you heal. I cannot help you with that. That is neither my forte nor something that I'm interested in. I will give you understanding. I will give you the perspective of how our kind think and do and say. And armed with that understanding, you will then get rid of your confusion. You will then be able to learn how to counter us, how to spot us, how to evade us, how to put in place no contact. And then, if it is necessary, you can seek the assistance of another individual for the purposes of healing. I would certainly recommend that you read my books. And if you are caught at the moment in terms of a narcissistic entanglement, you ought to be reading Fuel, Fury, Black Flag. You should then be reading Escape, No Contact, Black Hole, and Exorcism as a minimum to equip you with the tools for the purposes of understanding and getting out. The next question is from JS from the United States of America. My question is, how does the narcissist really feel when he knows his supply source is more advanced or superior than he is, in the sense of more intelligent or having a respectable talent, more accomplishments, etc.? Does it just depend on the narcissist, or are they all truly resentful, envious, and contemptuous of their source's accomplishments? The fact is, as ever, this is all about evidencing our hypocritical, contradictory, and contrarian natures. When we seduce you, the fact that you might earn more than us, that you are better looking than us, that you are more popular than us, are all traits which attract us, dependent on the type of narcissist that we are. You will need to have a number of the key empathic traits. You will also need certain class traits. So, for example, if you are beautiful, if you are talented at your job and earn good money and live in a large house and drive a flash car and go to good restaurants, wear expensive clothes and take care of yourself, you hit the class traits for a somatic or an elite. Those traits will accord with the narcissist's sense of superiority and entitlement. The narcissist will think, I am brilliant, I am handsome, therefore I want a beautiful girlfriend. I want a successful girlfriend. I want somebody who earns good money. Because in that respect, other people will look at this individual and admire them. And in turn, they will admire me for having them on my arm, for them being connected to me. All our appliances are connected to us, and none more so than the primary source.
Thus, if a somatic or elite narcissist steps out with a beautiful partner, potentially a trophy wife, in those instances, the fuel that is garnered from other people is gathered up by the narcissist, and all of those superior traits accord with the narcissist's sense of entitlement. Of course, once devaluation occurs, all of those traits which were once admired and coveted become the basis of envy and jealousy. The fact that you are beautiful means that you spend more time putting on your makeup than looking after the narcissist. The fact that you wear revealing clothing, whereas once upon a time we praised you for showing off your oversized thighs, we now say that you are a slut because you show too much flesh. The fact that you hold down a prestigious job at one point was a source of pride for us to boast about and accordingly gain fuel for ourselves. During devaluation, you spend more time working rather than thinking about us and the family. Whatever it is that we once admired about you and utilized for our own benefits through the provision of fuel and also character traits, we will then turn against you in our usual hypocritical and devaluing style for the purpose of drawing fuel from you. Thus, the envy and jealousy is real. That is what is always there. It is the false illusion that occurs as a consequence of seduction, which means that we are able to keep our jealousy and envy under control because of the power of the positive fuel that is provided during that stage.
The next question comes from Maple Bucket from the United States. Hello, HG. Do narcissists give tests to their appliances to gauge their level of commitment to the narcissist? Indeed, we do. During seduction, there will be repeated tests that are doled out to test the extent to which you provide fuel and the extent to which you are becoming bound to us, the extent to which you are submitting to our control. This may take the form of making a gentle criticism of you and seeing how you react. Sometimes it is that we actually reveal what we are. That is the behavior that is undertaken by a greater, to see what your reaction is. And if you gloss over it or reject it or say that that isn't the case, we recognize that you are submitting to our control and our seduction. We may decide not to return your call just for a couple of hours. We do not want to do anything that would affect our seduction of you too greatly, cause you to break off. But we will periodically engage in tests to see how you react, whether fuel flows or whether you are indifferent. We will see how closely bound you are becoming to us, whether we need to up our game. We will see whether you are coming under our control. Testing is done in that respect with regard to somebody we are making our intimate partner primary source. It will also happen with those that are our intimate partner secondary sources. Those individuals are tested quite frequently and to a greater degree to ascertain whether in the fullness of time they ought to be promoted to become a primary source. So there are tests all the way through the dynamic with our kind during seduction for the purposes of ensuring that we are getting it right in terms of your traits, your fuel provision, and your submission to our control. The next question comes from BR, who asks, what is your relationship to animals? They are helpless creatures. Why do they get empathy from the narcissists who can even adore them so much? It seems the place of a pet becomes more important than the primary source. I am completely indifferent to animals. They are a lower life form that do not give me fuel, and I have no interest in them. The only time I will have an interest in them is when I use them for the purpose of triangulation to gain fuel from an appliance. Accordingly, I may well take an interest in a dog if I see somebody that I know that I think will make a useful appliance to me. So I will make a fuss of their dog if they are out walking with it and pretend that I know about the breed, etc., even though I have looked it up only a day previously. In certain instances, one might look to behave in a manner that is critical of animals to see how the animal lover reacts. For example, if the animal lover is watching a program about cruelty to animals, one might remark about, well, they are only just dumb animals who end up being eaten anyway, so why is everybody concerned about their welfare?
and that will be done purely for the purposes of triangulating with the appliance to gain negative fuel from them by causing an upset reaction. A question from Candle from Australia. How to deal with a narcissistic child? The child is now 13 years old and has these signs already since she was 2 years old. Her parents, especially her mother, are fully exhausted. How can she protect herself to stay sane while she has to take care and also love her child? The child grew up in a very lovingly and normal home. One always has to be careful with regard to ascertaining the status of a child. The development is ongoing, and it may well be that they are just either exhibiting narcissistic traits or being an awkward teenager. If there are concerns, however, and this is supported by sufficient medical diagnosis, then when dealing with such an individual, it is necessary to learn how to deal with the manipulations. You need to become adept at spotting them, and in spotting them, know how to react. Know when to give fuel and when to refuse it. Understand that a reaction will arise as a consequence of a perception of a criticism, rather than being confused as to why a sudden temper tantrum has come out of nowhere. It may well be the case that the age of the child is such that the continuing development of the narcissistic traits could be, if not reversed, at least arrested by the assistance of appropriate health professionals in terms of managing the behaviour. Continuing to expose the child to good influences is key. In your question, you do not appear to have identified a source which appears to have generated the narcissism. And ordinarily, one would say, as I wrote about in the article Save the Children, that if you have an instance where there is a narcissistic influence on a child, you need to exert good influence to outweigh that narcissistic influence. If the parent is exhausted from dealing with the child, then in such an instance it is unlikely that the child is going to gain much fuel, and as a consequence is likely to turn to other people to gain that fuel on the premise that the child is indeed a narcissist. It would be useful to enlist help from other parties to allow the mother time to recuperate, and once recuperated, because no contact is not an option, she needs to know how the manipulations form, why they form, and how she can counter them. With that regard, my books Manipulated and Escape are applicable in terms of identifying what those manipulations are and how you are able to counter them where you are not able to walk away. In those circumstances, that would mean that she is not using as much energy to deal with the narcissistic child, and thus she is not going to become as run down as before. Furthermore, as I have explained in an earlier answer, because she now understands what is happening and why, or at least does so to a considerable extent, this will not prove as great a drain on her emotionally. The next question comes from the present collector from Perth in Western Australia. And the question is, please explain the dynamics in a narcissistic relationship where one partner is covert and the other is an overt narcissist. I don't categorize my kind with reference to covert nor overt. In terms of covert, the nearest approximation to that would be the mid-range narcissist, and in overt, that may well be a lesser or a greater. In most instances, you would be thinking about the interaction between a lesser and a mid-range narcissist. The dynamics in a narcissistic relationship between the two will differ dependent upon whether it is a familial relationship, a social relationship, a working relationship, whether they are tertiary sources to one another or more likely secondary sources, or ultimately whether it is a romantic relationship. There are a number of scenarios and quite detailed considerations to be considered when two narcissists collide in this fashion. And to that end, your question is beautifully timed, as two videos have been released, When Narcissists Collide, Parts 1 and 2. Part 2 does indeed deal with the situation where a lesser narcissist and a mid-range narcissist collide in the fields of social, work, familial, tertiary, and romantic. So if you listen to that video, you will have all the information that you've required there. Next, a question from Fiona in the United Kingdom. Hello, I've watched a few of your videos and just wondered what makes you such an expert on the subject of narcissism. The simple answer to that, Fiona, is because I am one. I have always known that I have been different to other people, and following university, a former primary source of mine, who is a psychologist, pointed out in a non-judgmental fashion that she believed that I suffered from narcissistic personality disorder and indeed antisocial personality disorder. I, of course, rejected her assertions at the time, but being an intelligent man, wanted to go away and ascertain whether there was any merit in what she was talking about. I researched it and realized I recognized much of what she was referring to with regard to my behaviors. I was somewhat pleased to have a label to apply to myself in terms of my behaviors, and I kept it to myself and determined thereafter that in order to become more skilled at manipulating and obtaining what I needed to understand everything I possibly could about myself, but not only that, others of my kind. I identified that my mother is a narcissist, that my maternal uncle is, that I have a cousin who is a narcissist. I have come across them socially. I have come across them in the workplace. And as a consequence of that, I have studied my own kind. I have also studied my victims. I've listened to them. I've observed them. I've determined the traits which are applicable to them. I've determined why it is we are attracted to them, what it is that I recognize, both in terms of the traits that they have and why they are useful to me. I've spent all of this time learning, and then as a consequence of my ongoing treatment with the good doctors, this has added a further layer to my understanding. So, my expertise comes from the very fact I am one, that I am a very clever man, and have been able to identify the behaviors in myself, in others, and also understand victims, and through all of this collate the information, apply it, and utilize it. Now, as a consequence of my desire to weaponize empaths and, in accordance with my godlike vision, it entertains me to think that I am weaponizing empaths to go up against my own kind, setting forth a worldwide battle between the two. That is why I am sharing this information now. I like to narrate, I like to write. I want people to know that I have this knowledge, and so that I become the best source for this knowledge. And in turn, as I have explained, its dissemination accords with the worldview that I have. The next question comes from Rose from Scotland, who asks, how would my narcissistic parent react if I emailed that parent about the abuse I received as a child? I know that this parent would deny, not care what I would say, and this parent would probably say that I am too sensitive. However, I am betting that this parent would start a smear crusade about me with the rest of my family. Is this what you think would occur? If you were to contact this parent and explain that you suffered abuse, I am assuming that you are suggesting that the narcissistic individual was the abuser. Of course, they would deny it, and they would suggest that you are making things up, that you are the crazy one. All self-defense mechanisms linked around the allegations of abuse and, in effect, their narcissism would be utilized. So there would be projection, denial, blame shifting, triangulation, gaslighting, etc. If the individual was a greater, they would know what had happened, but of course would realize that this would have to be denied. If the abuser was somebody else and you were seeking to gain sympathy from a narcissist, it would not be forthcoming. The narcissist will not care. There would be no empathy for your situation. And indeed, dependent upon the relationship between the narcissist and the abuser,
It might be the fact that you're affecting the facade of the narcissist, and inherently your allegations of abuse might well be regarded as a criticism of them. That would then result in the ignition of their fury, and they would lash out against you. In order to counter your allegations of abuse, either against the abusive narcissist or against an abuser that is linked to the narcissist, you are entirely correct that a smear campaign would be forthcoming. This would be done to point out that you perhaps have problems with alcohol or mental health difficulties, that you are a pathological liar, that you're an attention seeker, whatever it takes in order to drive a wedge between you and everybody else so that you are not believed and you are socially ostracized. This is, of course, done to enable the narcissist to maintain the facade, draw fuel from you as a consequence of your reaction to being denied in this fashion, and because the narcissist will instinctively deny any form of criticism that is levelled against them, either as a consequence of being the abuser or linked to the abuser. Our final question for this part comes from Merlin in the United Kingdom. I resisted for well over a year. The narcissist seemed to like it. Obviously, I fell in the end. Was I punished more when discarded for turning out to be as weak as his previous victims? I seem to be far blacker to him than any of them. Of course, this is all a matter of perspective, and I'm sure that his other victims have felt that they were treated equally as cruelly as you. The simple fact is that your devaluation and discard occurs for reasons that have been advanced in separate videos. You will then be punished at a later stage. This is because you let us down. You might have wounded us. You might have exposed us. More likely than not, it is because you stopped providing us with the fuel that we wanted, so you're discarded. You're a malfunctioning appliance, and we hate you for it. You once provided hope for us through the provision of glorious positive fuel, and you have let us down. Therefore, you are devalued, and then, when you serve no further purpose to us, you are discarded. During that devaluation, you may well be treated worse than other people. This is more likely as a consequence of the fact that the negative fuel that you provided when treated very badly was particularly potent to the narcissist, and therefore that individual knew that if they treated you very badly, you would provide them with excellent negative fuel repeatedly and in vast quantities. Hence, that is why you were treated as badly as you were. This concludes part 4 of Ask H.G. Tudor. Further questions will be answered in a forthcoming part 5.